The Didache was written in Greek and is quite short at about 2,600 words. It contains no historical events or persons to assist with dating. Also, it contains material in common with Matthew and Luke, which has led scholars to date it after their writing. However, there are two problems with this dating scheme. The Didache is a composite text. That is, it is not the work of one author at one time, but rather shows evidence of evolution. The other problem with this dating is the same as with the letters of Paul. Conventional first-century church history is heavily dependent on Acts and the church fathers, and if you reject that narrative, it pretty much pulls the dating rug from under the Didache. Its discussion of the two ways and what it has to say about sacrifice and the Eucharist suggests that it represents a transitional phase between Judaism and the earliest form of recognisable Christianity. The Didache has material in common with the Gospels of Luke and particularly of Matthew, leading to the three familiar possibilities. The Didache used the Gospels, the Evangelists used the Didache, or both used a common source. Starting with Matthew, this is Alan Barr's diagram of synoptic relationships, and you can see the way almost all of Mark has been used by Matthew and how Matthew has scattered it throughout his Gospel. The curious thing about the Didache is it contains 20 or so passages in common with Matthew, but not with Mark, which means that if the Didachist was using Matthew, for some reason he managed to avoid all the red parts here, and we cannot discern any purpose for that, meaning instead that Matthew was using the Didache. The passages common to Matthew and the Didache represent all of the different chronological layers of the Didache with the exception of mentions of the Gospel, presumably Matthew's, and the Trinity, suggesting that Matthew had virtually the whole Didache as we now know it, rather than a significantly earlier version. So it seems that Luke and Matthew both used the Didache, and it was virtually in the form that we now have it when it was used by at least Matthew. Mark's Gospel is highly historicising, with multiple references locating Jesus in time, place and person. Paul's letters are not, with no references locating Jesus in time or place, and one debatable reference to person, James, the Lord's brother. The Didache does not seem to be about Jesus. In fact, it's got hardly any Christology in it at all. And those references to Jesus that it does have are arguably late additions. Church fathers refer to the work as the teachings of the apostles, and that is probably the earliest version of the title. The word 12 was added later. All of the references to Jesus are in some way redundant in the sentences that they appear in, and all are close together in the Didache and closely related to each other in meaning. In all, Jesus is added as a qualifier to a person who's already been defined in the text as God's servant. If it's true that these were all late additions, then the original didn't contain any references to Jesus at all. It doesn't refer to Jesus' death, let alone his ministry or any other earthly activities. It gives no impression of any founding person, let alone a founding person with life events of theological significance. The servant is credited with showing them the way, but nevertheless there is a stark contrast between the Jesus-centred approach of early Christian literature and the Didache, because the Didache makes it look as though Jesus was inserted into a pre-existing religion,